Are the Buccaneers firmly back in the contenders conversation? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this live episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as editor-in-chief of the 813.tv. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is to become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Stash it and trash it. And does this Buccaneers team have an identity? That's all coming up in a little bit. But let's start with a question that was dropped in the post-game live chat from Demon Hunter, who I see in the chat right now. And that was whether or not the Bucs are officially contenders. Look, Baker Mayfield leads the NFL in touchdown passes and total touchdowns. He is top 10 in basically every quarterback category. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are tied for the most touchdown receptions in the league. Godwin is top 3 in just about every receiving category. The Bucs offense is number 2 in the league in scoring, number 2 in the league in passing, number 9 in total offense, and number 8 in rushing offense. But as of right now, I say no. And that may upset Demon Hunter. It may upset some of you in the chat. But I don't think this Buccaneers team right now is in the same tier as teams like the Detroit Lions. And yes, I know they beat the Lions. They're not in the same tier as teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, the Baltimore Ravens, the San Francisco 49ers, or even the Buffalo Bills. With that said, that can change, especially over the course of the next month. The biggest problem for this Bucs team has been the defense, which is not what you expect from a Todd Bowles coached team or just a Buccaneers team in general. The strength of this franchise has always been on the defensive side of the ball, but injuries have caused them to start off slow. They are 26th in total defense, 28th in passing defense, 12th in rushing defense, which is low for a Buccaneers team. I realize that it's right on the cusp of top 10, but this Buccaneers defense is usually top 5 in rushing defense, and then they're 20th in scoring defense. Those are not good enough numbers. Those are not good enough standings to be considered a legitimate contender. Baltimore is the only one of those upper tier teams that I mentioned before that trail the Bucs in any of those categories, and it's scoring defense where the Ravens are allowing 1.3 points more per game than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If the Bucs are going to go out and be considered legitimate contenders, the defense has to get things figured out. I know that the defensive performance in the second half against the Saints was outstanding. I know they've been without Kalijah Kancey and Antoine Winfield Jr. Now they're without Jamel Dean and Christian Izien. Other key players have missed time, but the defense cannot be in the bottom half or the bottom third of the league in defense and expect to compete for a championship. The offense can trade punches with any of those teams that I mentioned. In fact, they're probably vastly superior to teams like the Chiefs and the 49ers in terms of offense right at this moment. But at some point, Christian McCaffrey is going to come back for the 49ers, and that's going to change everything that they do offensively. Isaiah Pacheco is going to come back for the Kansas City Chiefs. That is going to change what they do offensively. You see teams like the Jets and the Bills making big moves for wide receivers. The Chiefs could do the same now that they are without Rashee Rice. What separates them from the Bucs is their defense. And as the old saying goes, it's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. Defense wins championships. The Chiefs are not undefeated because of Mahomes and the offense putting up 30 points a game anymore. They're a pedestrian offense. They win because of their pass rush and their defense allowing 17 points a game. That's how they won the Super Bowl last year. That's why they're one of the top teams in the AFC this year. The Lions are favorites out of the NFC because they have the league's top offense and a defense that only allows 18 points a game. Now, we're going to see how they adjust without Aiden Hutchinson, but that defense is still absolutely loaded with talent. Until the Buccaneers can start to get consistent pressure on the opposing quarterback and actually get stops on a consistent basis, then the defense isn't anywhere close to where it needs to be for the Bucs to be in that conversation. Offensively, absolutely, no doubt about it. But they're not making enough plays on the defensive side of the ball to give me the confidence that they can walk into Ford Field or Levi Stadium in January and get a win. The next month is going to tell us a lot about where the Buccaneers are against some of these other odds-on favorites. Home against Baltimore, home against Atlanta, at Arrowhead, home against the 49ers. 3 of those 4 are well regarded as contenders for a championship, and one was the preseason favorite and current favorite to win the division that the Bucs play in and just beat Tampa Bay in prime time. If the Bucs go 2-2, we might be able to shift them more towards the contender conversation, depending on how those 2 wins and those 2 losses kind of came about. If they do better than that, if they go 3-1, or if they go 4-0, then absolutely they are cemented in that conversation, and the NFL world would be put on notice. But you come out over the next month 1-3, 0-4, then no, they're not contenders. They aren't contenders no matter what happens after that. They could get a win in the playoffs, sure, but they can't be in the same tier as the big boys in the NFL and come out of the next 4 games under 500. They will have proven at that point that they're still missing some pieces and they just aren't quite ready to take that next step. That's at least my opinion on the matter. Let's jump in the chat and see what some of you guys are saying about the contender conversation. We have Space Windu. I love that name. Shout out Mace Windu. We need to play a few more games and tighten up with the mistakes. They will get it together. I believe that they will, Space. I 100% do. We've seen the flashes, and we saw how that defense was able to play for 75% of a game with the return of Kalijah Kancey and Antoine Winfield Jr. And the big difference that they make, they can get it together. But as of right now, on October 15th, I'm not ready to put them in that contender conversation the way that I was after the win in Detroit, because in that win, the offense showed some things, but they had some shortcomings. It was the defense that really rallied and kept the Bucs in it against who is now the number 1 offense in the NFL. So I know they have the talent. I know they have the ability, but they have to show it. And they have to show it for 4 quarters consistently, not get shellacked in 1 quarter and then come together in the second half. Gary says, I disagree. I think they can play any team. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they can't. I think Monday night's game is going to be a really close one. Baltimore is a tough football team. They do have a really good defense. They have playmakers on that side. Derrick Henry has taken that team to a whole nother level. And in the past, it was like, all right, well, the Bucs are facing Derrick Henry, no big deal. But Derrick Henry with Will Levis or I'm forgetting their quarterback's name, the Titans quarterback before, Ryan Tannehill. It's not those guys back there throwing passes. It's Lamar Jackson, who's also one of the best dual threat quarterbacks that we have seen over the last 20 years. So, in being 12th in the NFL in rushing defense, their rushing defense is not up to par at where it normally is. So, I'm a little concerned about that one, but I think it's going to be close. And I think the Bucs can hang with Baltimore. They can hang with Kansas City. They can hang with San Francisco. It's about, can they get the wins? That's where it's going to matter, because they were close against Detroit in the divisional round. They didn't get the win. It's the difference between where they were at the end of last year, where they are right now, and that next step that they have to take to really put themselves in the heart of that conversation. Jeff in the chat says, yep, we've had problems containing Jackson in the past. No doubt about it. We got Jamar in the chat, says we have the best defense in the NFC. I'm going to vehemently disagree. However, Jamar, I will meet you somewhat halfway. They have the talent and the potential to be one of the best defenses in the NFC, but we got to see them put it all together, because they have not done that yet. Now that Cansey's back, now that Antoine's back, we're going to see about Dean, we're going to see about Izzian and some of these other pieces. We'll see how they really start to find a groove now that they have, a far more healthy defense. But right now, I would say no, they do not have the best defense in the NFC. We are going to stash it and trash it. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Buccaneers are 3.5-point home underdogs to the Baltimore Ravens with an over-under of 48.5. They still trail the Atlanta Falcons in the odds to win the NFC South. The Falcons are sitting at -170, and the Bucs are at +175. But if you want to get started on the action a little bit early, the Broncos are 2.5-point road favorites as Sean Payton returns to New Orleans to take on the Saints. That game has an over-under of 36.5. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players leaves in the first half and doesn't return. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quickly as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word, and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You do not need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, just make sure you're coming back tomorrow. I'm finally rejoined by Evan Klosky. I'm going to ask him about that contender question. I'm interested to get his take on it, because we had differing opinions after the Lions game. I want to know what he thinks now with the Bucs being 4-2 coming off that win against the Saints. In the meantime, the new Locked On NFL is here, and it is 2 shows every day. The Madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, then swing by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. You add in the Locked On local experts, and you're going to get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day, so make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Going to stash it and trash it, and go ahead and drop your stash and trash in the chat. I'll get to those as quickly as possible, but my stash from this one is Tucker time. Just like we christened the name Antoine Himfield Jr. right here on this podcast, and watch the rest of the Buccaneers world follow suit, I am hereby making a declaration that the fourth quarter of Buccaneers games will henceforth be known as Tucker time. The Bucs have needed that running back that can keep the clock moving late in games and secure wins by picking up positive yardage and moving the chains. That's exactly what Sean Tucker is able to do. Once Rashad is back, the running back timeshare is going to be a three-headed monster. So how are these snaps going to get split up? If I'm Liam Cohen, I'm keeping the beginning of the game relatively similar to how it's been all season long. Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, both being used, maybe a little increase with their usage in the passing game, but in the second half, that's where I'm going to shift things. Tucker needs to be involved in goal line situations, regardless of what time of the game it is, but he needs to start being sprinkled in throughout the third quarter. Let him start to get a little bit of a feel for the game and a little bit of a rhythm. Then in the fourth quarter, it's Tucker time. You can have Rashad or Bucky out there for a play or two here and there if Tucker needs a spell, but it's a heavy dose of Sean Tucker in crunch time. Of Tucker's 136 yards in the win against the Saints, 107 of them came in the fourth quarter. On the Bucs' final possession, they ran 6 plays. All of them were carries by Tucker, and he finished with 64 yards and a touchdown on that drive. Deploying Tucker on a beaten up, tired, sore defense is when he's going to excel the most. Rashad and Bucky are good running backs, but neither one of them is all that big or powerful. I know Rashad has been kind of the power back. That role needs to go to Sean Tucker. I talked about it through the whole draft process about how much I wanted the Bucs to draft a guy like Braylon Allen or Audric Estime and get that real legit power back to complement Rachaad White. The Bucs have that in Sean Tucker, and they have to utilize it late in games. Tucker is that guy that can take advantage of worn-out defenses and turn small runs into big gains and chew up the clock to ice things late in the game. It's going to be really tough for Cohen to navigate when it comes to making sure all of these guys are getting their opportunities, but the end of the game needs to be reserved for Sean Tucker moving forward. Obviously, that is game script dependent. If the Bucs are down by 10, I would expect Rashad or Bucky to be out there as more of the pass catching back options, the more elusive guys. This is more of the grind out the clock, wear down the defense kind of play late in games. As far as my trash it from the win against the Saints, I'm going to just, it's my show. I can cop out if I want to. The whole second quarter. Trash the whole second quarter. The Bucs outside of that second quarter on Sunday were an elite team on both sides of the ball. For whatever reason, there was 15 minutes where both sides of the ball were just absolutely abysmal. The Bucs offense could not get anything going. Baker Mayfield had more interceptions in the second quarter than he had in the previous 5 games combined. And yes, I know they weren't all his fault, but the fact remains that those kinds of mistakes were not happening the first 5 weeks of the season. Defensively, the Bucs gave up 113 of the Saints' 303 total yards in that quarter. They allowed 20 points to be scored on them. I'm not putting the punt return on the defense. That wasn't their fault, but I'll talk about it in a minute. Radler went 5 for 7 over one stretch of that second quarter, and the Bucs just could not get the stop that they needed. Short fields didn't help matters any. The Saints started inside Bucs territory on 2 of the 3 scoring drives for that offense. The other one was a 7-play, 70-yard drive. The penalties got out of control on both sides of the ball in the second quarter. Sterling Shepard had a couple of really, really stupid penalties. There was a ridiculous holding call on Kalisha Cansey for holding on to the center. It was an absolute mess. It was literally the worst football that you could have seen from one team in a single quarter. Even special teams, as I mentioned earlier, they allowed a touchdown. Special teams is 1/3 of the game, and even they fell apart during that stretch. The Saints took the ball away on 3 of the Bucs' 5 second quarter possessions. One of those possessions that didn't end in a takeaway resulted in a Bucs touchdown. That was cool. That was fun. Gave him the lead back. but then one ended in that punt return for a touchdown. So this game could have been 51-0. I mean, it could have been 65-0 if they played the whole game the way they did the first quarter in the second half. So just throw the whole second quarter out. That's not who they are. It's not who they're going to be. And if they play like that in any singular quarter against the Ravens on Monday, the final outcome probably will not be as positive as this one was. The Ravens offense is going to be much more difficult to contain than the Saints defense was for that entire second half. As I meant, Derrick Henry, number one running back in the league. Lamar Jackson, two-time MVP that can hurt you with his arm and his legs. Zay Flowers is on an absolute heater right now. Mark Andrews finally starting to get involved. That Andrews likely combination at tight end against this Bucs defense and what they've shown against tight ends so far should have people a little concerned. That's going to be a big matchup to watch. But as far as my trash it from the Saints game, it's the whole second quarter. It's not indicative of who the Bucs are and who they are going to be moving forward. Going to jump into the chat real quick. We got Christopher Cole says all three phases of our team was trash in the second quarter, 100%. We got Bry saying Ravens are number one ranked run defense, so don't be surprised or overreact if they don't repeat that kind of performance. I mean, I personally would not expect the Bucs to repeat that type of rushing performance at any point over the course of the next 4 games. It doesn't mean that they can't be effective in the run game, but 277 rushing yards is absolutely out of this world. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect that kind of performance probably for the rest of the year. Doesn't mean that the Bucs can't get key runs in key situations and keep the defense a little bit honest and keep their offense two-dimensional going up against that defense. HBK Woo says trash Dean. Dean's having a rough time. I hope he's healthy. The Bucs will need him out there. Shout out to Tyreek Funderburk. He did a really good job in relief of Jamel Dean. Tyke Smith elevated his game when Dean went out, but I just keep waiting for something to click and for us to see that old Dean that we had seen for a couple of years there. One other question that came rolling in. What is the Buccaneers identity? That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. All know how much I love going to live events, concerts, sporting events. I'm constantly talking on this show about a concert or a game that I'm getting ready to go see. And the first place that I'm checking out when I look for tickets is Game Time. In fact, I just used Game Time to get my dad an early birthday surprise. We're going to head off to Champaign, Illinois to see the Fighting Illini take on the University of Minnesota here in a couple of weeks. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. That's exactly what I used when I got these tickets. We're in the 10th row in the corner of the end zone. Awesome seats thanks to Game Time Picks. And with all-in pricing, I knew exactly what I was going to spend when I got to checkout. There were no surprise fees or anything like that. Just go ahead and click on that all-in pricing toggle to make sure that you don't get any surprises when you're checking out tickets for this Monday's Bucs-Ravens game, where tickets are starting out under $100. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And after the game, longtime listener Mad Dog reached out to me, shot me a message, and asked, through 6 games, does this team have an identity? And it got me to think back to some of the best teams, even some of the worst teams that the Bucs have had throughout the years and what their identities were. Those late 90s, early 2000s teams were smothering elite defense and pound the rock, whether it was Warwick Dunn and Mike Allstott, Michael Pittman and Mike Allstott. That was the identity. They were going to grind you down with their run game. Brad Johnson was going to throw the ball to Keyshawn Johnson or Keenan McCardell or Ken Dilger or, other guys like that. But primarily on offense, they were going to pound the rock and they were going to punish you. And then on defense, they were really going to punish you. The Brady years were a combination of an elite defense and then an offense that was run by the greatest quarterback of all time. So it never mattered what the score was heading into the fourth quarter. You always knew that the Buccaneers had a chance to win. They were never really out of a game. The Winston years, you had elite talent at different positions across the field, but there was nothing that really galvanized them and took them to the next level. They were still missing too many key pieces despite the rest of the talent that was already there. This team's identity, I think right now, is an offense that's going to carry the load and a defense that just needs to be good enough to complement them. Baker Mayfield is playing better now than he did last season. I mentioned it before at the top of the show. He's at the top of the league in passing touchdowns and total touchdowns. 4th in completion percentage, 2nd in passer rating, 6th in yards per attempt. He's playing out of his mind. That's what this team has to rally behind right now. You have the best, without question. I will not hear any nonsensical debates. The best wide receiver duo in the league right now, based on how they're playing through the first third of the season. They are tied atop the league in touchdown receptions. They're both averaging about 12 yards per reception, top 10 in the NFL in receptions resulting in a first down. Godwin is at the top of the league in yards after catch and receptions. Godwin has just 10 targets this season that he hasn't caught. That's less than 2 a game. He's playing out of his mind. We talked about it all offseason leading up to this year that Godwin was going to be that Cooper Kupp role in this offense, and he is living up to that billing in every sense of the term. They now have a running game that's starting to find a groove and an ability. They have 3 guys that you can have confidence in anytime that they're on the field, that they're going to get positive yards, and any one of them could break off a huge run and flip the field or score on any given play. That's the identity right now. This is a team built on offense, and the defense just has to make sure that they stay in it and give the offense a chance to go out there and win the game. And I do believe that the defense is going to get better. Kalijah Cansey, Antoine Winfield Jr., they were both great on Sunday, and having them back is huge. But as you saw, it's going to take a little while for everything to gel like it's supposed to. You have other guys stepping up and emerging as legitimate playmakers, legitimate difference makers. Zion McCollum has established himself as a top corner in the NFL. Tyke Smith gets better every single week, and he is coming off of an all-time performance for a rookie. Logan Hall has established himself as a legitimate pass rush threat. All of these things are happening now, and you're going to continue to see the trickle-down effect, the domino effect of what that will mean for the defense as a whole. Those guys specifically, McCollum, Tyke, Logan Hall, they're already adding to some elite players that the Bucs already had. You guys, Vita Vea, Cansey, Levante, Antoine, Jordan Whitehead, who's been fantastic. So as McCollum and Smith and Hall continue to get better week after week, which they have, every single one of them has, by time this bye week rolls up, or they're coming out of the bye week, those guys are going to be at a peak. And that's when I really, really believe you're going to see the defense playing its best. It might be right before the bye when they take on the San Francisco 49ers. That is really when this defense, as long as it stays healthy, is going to start to find a groove. But at this stage, heading into week 7, this is a team where offense is going to be the bread and butter, while the defense just has to make sure that they get a key stop or two, maybe a takeaway, and not waste the offense's efforts. And it's really, really weird to talk about that kind of play in Tampa, who has always been a team that hung its hat on defense. Even those god-awful early teams, they were all about defense, where, they start 0-14, then they go 2-12, then all of a sudden they're in the NFC Championship with Doug Williams at quarterback, but it was the defense that got them there. So having an offensive-minded Buccaneers team is a little different for pretty much all of us, but that's who they are right now. And Baker Mayfield is, in my opinion, and I'll talk about it with Evan on tomorrow's show, he's in the MVP conversation. We'll talk about it more on tomorrow's show. Going to jump into the chat real quick before we get out of here. We got Space Window in the chat saying Lightning game is about to start. Yes, it is. I'm going to flip it on. I have a couple other shows that I'm going to do tonight, but I will have it on in the background. We got Edwin. It says this Monday night game is going to be a close one. Hopefully we can pull this off and get the win. Let's go Bucs. David Stacks in the chat. My buddy David. Baker is a baller and Cleveland is stupid. Indeed they are. Cleveland is so stupid. I feel bad for their fans. I'm friends with a lot of Browns fans. David, I'm sure you are too. I feel bad for them now. And they're all, every single one of them sits there and tells me, like, I'm kind of pulling for the Bucs as like my NFC team because I'm angry at the Browns and I still love Baker. So that's the life of a Browns fan, man. I feel so bad for him. But yeah, that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please make sure you're coming back tomorrow. Check out what Evan Klosky has to say. Excited to reunite with him. Check out everything going on over at the 813.tv. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would be so kind and you want other Buccaneers fans to find the show, hit that like button on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really, really does help other fans find the show, and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to become a Locked On Bucs insider, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.